Joining us, Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, the former Northern Commander. What's very interesting to also point out here, and when Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda is joining us, is that he was also the commander when the last standoff actually took place in Ladakh. This was in Chumur in September 2014, and subsequent another smaller one in DBO. Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, thank you very much for speaking to Republic Media Network. I think so this would be an appropriate time to ask you your assessment of the current situation. We'll thereafter also discuss about the differences, but your assessment as far as the military level talks that have taken place, what are you gathering, sir?
So Shawan, I know as much as you do, frankly. Probably the media knows a little more than I do. Let me just give you my sort of broad overall assessment. I think there are some positives. And the positives are that, the standoff is now 1 month old. And after the initial sort of, clash between the two armies, things have largely remained peaceful. The escalation has not extended to other areas. It's remained restricted to where it was. There is also some talk that, for example, at Galwan, it has eased off. We don't know. The other positive is that talks are continuing. There have been many rounds of military to military level talks. I'm aware they haven't really met with some great success, but then the talks are getting upgraded. People are talking to each other. There is also reports that at the diplomatic level, talks are on. And there are some positive sort of statements coming out from ministries of both sides that, hopefully things can be sorted out peacefully. So these are the positives that I see emerging. There is also seriousness, Shawan, and the seriousness lies in the fact that you have a sizable number of Chinese soldiers on what we consider as our territory. So they are on Indian territory in the area of Pengongso. And this possibly is going to be the key factor as far as we are concerned in our negotiation. That Chinese troops who are on our side of the LAC, as we understand it, should go back. And obviously, Shawan, this is something that's not going to get very easily resolved. So I think, we are in for some protracted and tough negotiation.
Lieutenant General Hooda, I know it would be perhaps inappropriate to really compare the two situations, what's happening right now, what happened in Chumur in 2014. But just for the better understanding of our viewers who are basically tuning in at this point in time, how would you actually try and resolve this entire matter? What are the dynamics that are essentially involved? Because you've dealt with this issue once. So what would it essentially mean when you have military level talks that are actually happening right now? What would it essentially entail at this stage?
Okay, Shawan. So as you said, every situation is different. But obviously, from our past experiences and the way past standoffs have been resolved, there are some lessons to be learned. So let me just say the first lesson is that yes, you will have soldiers of both sides coming in close contact with each other. As has happened at Pengongso, as also happened at Chumur in 2014, when we had to physically stop the Chinese dozer and JCB from constructing a road in what we considered was our area. So initially there is some small physical scuffle, although it wasn't to the extent that has happened this time. I think the key thing is on both sides, restraint must be observed. At Chumur, Shawan, we had almost 1,000, 1,500 soldiers from each side facing off each other at distances of 2 to 3 meters. And our instructions from our side, and we saw similar restraint from the Chinese side, was let's not escalate the situation. Because then if things on ground get tense, then obviously positions sort of harden on both sides. So that is one part. The second thing is when negotiations start, I think both sides very clearly lay down what their sort of red lines are. And we clearly told them that, it is not acceptable that you attempt to physically construct a road into our area. But then negotiations must be held in a spirit of cooperation. There is no point too much bickering, blaming each other. I think calmly put your sides And I think the third lesson is, Shavan, that uh, military to military contacts can only go up to a particular point, particularly in situations which become complex. And therefore, at some stage, diplomacy has to step in. You see, the military men on both sides are very clear about what their territory is, and therefore, for them to even sort of give it 1 inch is very difficult. And therefore, uh,
Right.
negotiations at the diplomatic level are some things where tempers are sort of calmer, and where things can take place. So I think we can set the stage by military level contacts, but ultimately I think it's diplomacy which is going to decide.
Well, General Hooda, you've also extensively written about the perception of the LAC, be it the Chinese perception or the Indian perception. But there was a drastic change that perhaps was brought in when you were the Northern Commander also. In fact, you've written about it just today. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
No. So, Shaman, it wasn't that I made any changes. You see, the LAC, as far as we are concerned, is marked on our maps. It's a line which is approved by the government of India. And therefore, as far as we are concerned, when people talk about perceptions of the LAC, our LAC is very clear to us. There is no gray zone, as people are saying. There are no sort of, as far as we are concerned, disputed areas. There is one line. Yes, the Chinese have a different perception, and that is fine. But as far as soldiers on ground are concerned, we can't have them confused about where Indian territory is. And therefore, our orders in Northern Command was that our maps should only have one line, which is India's line of actual control and how it runs. It's only then that soldiers will be clear, which is our territory, where do we have to patrol up to. Even, for example, we talk about Pengongso and the Chinese patrols coming in, and they would come in. But what was the drill from our side? We would stand there and we would have a banner. And the banner said, please go back. You are in Indian territory. So that's why I get a little sort of confused when people talk about, that there is no clarity, as if there is some fuzzy line on ground which we are not clear about. We are absolutely clear where our LAC runs, and there should be clarity on our side. Yes, we don't want, we know there are some areas where there are differing perceptions of the Chinese, and therefore they patrol, and for sake of keeping calm, we are not fighting at each other. There are protocols to deal with it. But there is no gray zone, Shavan, as far as the military is concerned. We are very clear where our line is.
Well, that's very important, especially for the layman. It's important to point out here that there is no grey area, and that's very important. Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, I would also like to draw your attention to another important issue, particularly about the Galwan area. This is what we have essentially picked up, that on 7th of May, when the Indian Army was basically carrying out a reconnaissance, that's when they basically identified some sort of armored vehicles of the Chinese Army, at least building up, at least on the Chinese LAC side. And also they had a problem with the feeder road of Darbuk DBO road to the patrol point 14. This entire thing that we are looking at, infrastructure building from the Indian side, is also being objected. Is this something new, or this has always happened? This has happened during your tenure also. It has happened in the past. So are we to look at it in a very different manner, that when it comes to infrastructure building on our side, why is it that the Chinese is objecting? Is there more than what meets the eye?
So, Shavan, this is not a new thing. I mean, I'm talking about Chinese objections about our infrastructure building. So obviously, they have built up in the past few years massive infrastructure on their side, very good roads, their campsites, their logistic installations, etc., are superior than what we have. Obviously, they want to retain this kind of advantage. And therefore, when we are building infrastructure on our side, that's when we find that, sometimes they do object. We used to have a very large number of what we call border personals meeting with the Chinese, and they would raise some of these issues. But again, Shavan, it wasn't as if it was a huge sticking point. you had to tell them that this is on our side, and just as you have done on your side, we are doing on our side. I think where particular sensitivity came in was in what was areas where there were differing perceptions of the LAC. So there, if you start building some infrastructure, that's when it became more sensitive. So Pengongso, for example, and that's why we are objecting to their making anything permanent in that area. But I think there should be no reason for them to object if you want to make a road to Galwan going up to our LAC. They do object, but I think we need to stand our ground firm on this and make sure that our ability to manage the border, to patrol, to be able to react to incidents is there. Sometimes, Shaban, this whole infrastructure building is used as an excuse if they want to do something on the LAC and they want to come in some area, and they say we are doing it only as a reaction to your action. So that's the excuse they always give, that we didn't want to do this, but because you have done some actions like this road building, etc., therefore we are doing it. I think more often than not, it's an excuse.
Well, thank you very much, General D.S. Hooda, for putting this into perspective. And as a lot of military experts have been pointing this out, for every Chinese action, there has been an equal Indian reaction. On that note, thank you very much, Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda, for speaking to Republic Media Network.
Thank you, Shaban. All the best.